She described them as buffalo wallows, which I was
Yeah.
like, oh my goodness.
This is not archaeology. This might actually be criminal. Welcome to Archaeology Books for Fun, digging books that aren't drier than dirt. I'm your host, Tristan Herrenstein. With me, as always, is my co-host, Barbara Clark.
Hello, everybody.
Last time, we finished up the book Hoofbeats, which was all about the relationship between humans and horses and how we went from eating them to using them in carts and then riding them on horseback, and how they shape our cultures and stuff as well. This time, we're going to take a break from the real world and dive into the world of archaeology, murder, mystery, fiction.
Yay!
Yeah, so this is a return to a series that we read actually almost a couple years ago on the nose now, called Artifacts. The series is called the Faye Longchamp Mystery. Faye Longchamp is our protagonist in the story, and we were very impressed with how archaeology was represented, and actually in that particular book, our region of Florida was represented in the book. And so we've always had it in mind that we wanted to return to one of these books after a while. And so if you haven't listened to our episodes covering the first book, Artifacts, we recommend going back and giving those a listen. You'll be able to follow along just fine with this episode, though, so you certainly don't have to do that if you don't want to. But they are worth listening because that was a lot of fun. And also, we ended that book with an interview with the author. And so that's what we're doing. So this book is titled Relics, which is not the easiest book to search for by that title. But if you include the author, Mariana Evans, you will definitely find it and it will come up. And I got to say, I'll tell you right now, I'm enjoying this book so far.
Me too.
Yeah, it's really
fun
to come back to this. And I think the writing is really good.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised because Artifacts was great as well. And in talking with Mariana Evans when we interviewed her, we now know she does a lot of kind of background research for her book.
Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. The book starts off with a prologue, which almost could be like the teaser for a book. It was very, very short for a prologue.
Yeah.
But it also, I think that she did this on a previous book. It started with like almost revealing the archaeology mystery portion. And that's kind of what this does. Essentially, this is dealing with some early colonial stuff. And I think fictionally, there is a group of Europeans. I can't remember what country they were from.
Portugal.
Portugal. Okay, they're Portuguese.
Or related, or possibly. I guess there's some ambiguity there, maybe.
Well, we're talking about the ship specifically here.
Oh, yeah.
Not the...
Yeah.
That'll come in later.
Okay.
So maybe it doesn't reveal that part actually yet. But basically, there's a ship that landed in the Gulf of Mexico, and they went north thinking they're going to find treasure, gold and stuff. And
a tale as old as time.
Yep, and that is actually the premise kind of which leads us into kind of the archaeology mystery for the main book. I appreciated in this, it was pretty matter of fact in how colonialism was presented.
Yeah.
But also plenty critical, which frankly, being critical of that is matter of fact, or should be. But I don't have anything more to add to that one unless you do, Barbara.
No, I do like the fact that she kind of, I don't know what year this was written, but I found it interesting that she did kind of talk about colonialism in that framework, I guess, because I feel like, especially in archaeology, that's in the last 5 to 10 years, that has been really a focus, just whitewashing colonialism in that era. And I'm glad to see authors and others kind of taking that tone as well.
So moving us on to chapter 1. It starts with kind of a recap a little bit of the previous book. Nothing too detailed.
Yeah, just kind of reintroducing
who
characters.
Faye is, basically. Yeah. So she grew up in what we call the Big Bend area of Florida. So it's when the peninsula turns south area. And it says here, I don't know if we knew this before, she was born in Tallahassee.
Yeah, I do remember that. I'm assuming Tallahassee Memorial.
Probably. I liked the little bit where the floor she was born on is the highest altitude she'd ever been in her life.
Right.
That was kind of funny. We get some little information about her. She's 36. She basically inherited a home on an island that is an old plantation home, and she is a descendant of the enslaver and the enslaved people as well. And so the first book dealt a lot with that, with her kind of reading a diary from some of her ancestors ancestors and other things too, but that was a big part of the first book.
Yeah.
This time, she is off to a project in Alabama, and she is really enjoying her first time driving on roads with canyons and such.
Faye, I relate, girl.
Yeah,
I
I know
hate
you did.
driving in the mountains. I was reading this and being like, yes, why are there not guardrails? She muttered. And I was like, I mutter that too when I'm driving in the mountains. But yeah, she and Joe are driving to the project area. But yeah, Faye sounded so much like me. I was like, yep.
It reminds us that Joe is 10 years younger than her. And the book frequently reminds us, too, that Joe is super hunky.
Yes.
I think Marianne Evans, I think the phrasing she used was, he was introduced to be an unsuitable love interest. So he's not a love interest,
Right.
but he's there because I think she said, the publisher said she needed some, eye candy or something.
Yeah, and I like the dynamic between him and Faye a lot, and
it's kind of sibling friend.
it is, yes,
So far, at least, there is no inkling of any romance interest between them.
And from our interviews with her, with Mariana Evans, it sounds like there never is, or that is not the intention. So we'll see.
Yeah, I don't know if she was just avoiding spoilers for us or whatever either, But that was the impression I got. At least there was no intention at the start, from what I understood.
But they're heading to a project that is, I guess, grant funded by the NIH to trace the genetic history of, I guess they call it a rural assistance project, but chase the genetic history of a kind of isolated group in Alabama called the Sujosa. Is that how you would pronounce that, Tristan?
It is a made-up word.
Right. So in my head, that's how I was pronouncing it. So
yeah, they think it's based on Portuguese, and I think Portuguese says the J's more like we do.
I think so, yeah.
Not like Spanish would say it with an H sound. So I think that's, for our current understanding, I think that's worthwhile.
But it is interesting because as she's talking about this group of people and everything, it's mentioned that extreme fringe theorists thought they were one of the lost tribes of Israel. And I was like, oh, here we go again.
Yep. If you want to hear more about that and why that is a load of garbage, check out our episodes covering frauds, myths, and mysteries. Yeah, and the book basically is discrediting a lot of these fringe theories.
This chapter talks a lot about the history of the Sujosa, and one of the reasons that they're conducting this project is because the Sujosa seem to have possibly immunity to AIDS, or at least some immunity to AIDS. They don't seem to contract it as easily as others, if at all. But it seems like there's other components to the project as well. So that's not it's a very kind of broad project, it seems like, which is pretty accurate, especially for a grant of that proportion.
Yeah, so they're bringing in not only an archaeologist, but they're bringing in geneticist, linguist, oral historian, basically
a tutor,
whole bunch of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a note here. It sounds like an amazing project with some potential ethical concerns. And I think the book is going to deal with some of these.
I think so, yeah. And importantly, well, not importantly, but kind of funny, as Joe and Faye are driving through the mountains into this community, somebody had hung a paper mache doll from a tree and it scared them.
Well, he dropped it on
Yeah,
them.
he dropped it on the car as they were going by, and Faye gets really, really bent out of shape. I mean, I feel that's fair, but
she almost went off the edge, essentially.
Literally.
Yeah, I meant literally, yes. Yep, and Joe kind of talks her down a little bit. Joe is an interesting character. He developed nicely in the first book, and I'm looking forward to see how he develops here.
Right, yeah.
Because I thought it was interesting, too, because we had a student in Pensacola do a book club on the first book fairly recently, and some of the people reading it also picked up some of my initial concerns with kind of felt like Joe was almost a little bit of a stereotype at first, but then in that book, he developed well beyond that, and then I'm looking forward to see how he develops further in this one. But he's always kind of sturdy, I'd say. So he kind of nothing, no harm was actually done. We're okay.
Right.
He kind of talks her down a little bit. And she's like, yes, he's right. One very, very important detail that I needed to make sure I pointed out before we move on to chapter 2, though, Barbara, is Faye is getting to see autumn for the first time, and she finally gets why people always go on about it.
Yeah. Okay, look, yellow grape leaves and brown sweet gum leaves falling from the trees totally counts as autumn. Okay, Tristan, get over it.
Yeah. So that's important for people who live in different parts of the world because Florida doesn't exactly have an autumn. Things just kind of turn brown and then fall off the leaves. There's almost no color to the leaves.
Leaves fall. Hello.
Yeah,
Totally
in the
count.
spring. Anyway, you can tell this is an ongoing thing with us.
If you know someone who's going on a work trip soon and loves murder mysteries, send them this episode. We think they'll like it.
So moving on to chapter 2, they arrive in the Sujosa settlement. I think we said it, but it's worth saying again, just to make sure that people are clear. The Sujosa and the town and the exact place those are all fictional. These do not actually exist. I did look up a little bit, and she did study some, what is the term, tri-ethnic populations.
Okay.
And that's what we're dealing with here. The Sujosa have some Native American root, some European root, and some African root. And they don't know exactly where all these groups came from and how they came to be here. And so that's part of what the team is trying to figure out. I appreciated that. I forget the exact phrasing again, but it was phrased as like, so some Native Americans who were here, some Africans who were imported, and Europeans who imported themselves.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
They show up and they figure out where they're staying, and it's kind of a group housing type situation. It reminded me of our visit to Virginia last year when all of us at FCAN stayed in one of the field houses at Montpelier. I was like, I feel like this probably has the same vibe.
Very similar, yeah. I did like a lot when they're driving through town. Faye made a very authentic feeling observation about one of the houses. She observed one of the houses had mint green asbestos siding.
Yeah.
And it says basically that this tells her that this was someone in about the mid 20th century who was fairly well to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like all that, and then hasn't been well to do since because they've kept that same siding.
Mm-hmm.
So like, not saying that you or I would necessarily pick up on that, but those are kinds of observations that we do pick up on. Very authentic, very well researched, it seems like.
And I think you and I, as we work in like a lot of rural communities, we've seen a lot of that. You drive into a community and you can see all these houses that were once like very well to do, very, upper end, I guess. And over time, they've just kind of fallen into disrepair and nobody's had the money to kind of upkeep them or,
I like the additional observation of knowing exactly when they were well to do or precisely when they were well to do. That's kind of cool too. I liked it. So we, in the women's bunkhouse, we get introduced to Carmen Martinez, who is the oral historian. Yeah. She seems like a character, a fun character.
Yeah. And so far, I like her.
Very personable. Faye almost wonders here a little bit if she's a little too outgoing and a little too direct. But as we see, it seems like she's pretty effective at her job.
Yeah.
So we get a basic introduction. I did like Carmen saying, oh, and you probably want to get your stuff moved in, and then there's a meeting later, and then Joe shows up carrying all of her bags, and Carmen's like, oh, I guess your stuff's here.
Oh, you came with someone to tow your stuff for you.
Yeah, I guess you don't need to unpack. Yeah. So kind of a funny little bit.
Oh, and I think we also meet, Laurel? She's the education specialist. I guess she was hired just to tutor.
We didn't. She's mentioned, but it was actually Joe showing up on the porch.
Oh, that's right. They thought it was going to be Laurel.
I had a little confusion for a moment too.
Yes, you're right. You're right.
But yes, that is someone we will meet. Not actually in this episode, really though. Like she's there, but she doesn't really have a
that's true.
presence yet. Faye has time before that meeting to go and check out the excavation.
Oh boy, yeah.
And her PI is Dr. Raleigh.
Yeah, and we should say PI stands for principal investigator.
But yes, so that is the person who is in charge of the overall project for everybody. So she goes out and checks out the excavation, and initially I got the impression she's just unimpressed.
Yeah, I guess the project started 2 weeks before she was able to get out of there because of bureaucratic stuff.
Yeah.
And so in the meantime, Dr. Raleigh decided to start excavating, and she's unimpressed.
Yeah, and when she said that, I thought, oh, his walls are going to be a little crooked or something.
That's where my mind went too.
And no.
It's horrible. Like,
She says she wondered if she can press charges over this, and I thought, oh, you're overreacting. And then she described it like, no, this might actually be criminal.
yeah,
Like, might actually be criminal.
yeah,
Like, because he has permits to do certain things, and he's
Just-
cannot be doing those things.
yeah,
So he's just basically having people dig holes, and we dig in square holes. People who at home may not know this. Reason we dig in those careful square holes is because it allows us to say, in this amount of soil we found this amount of charcoal or brick or whatever we're finding. If you don't do it like that, you can say, we found this and this and this and this, but there's no
it's not systematic, and you
no
can't get
systematic
like good
approach to it.
stats. And,
Yep. If you dig one side deeper than the other side, then you could be like blasting out a feature and you don't know it. There's all kinds of problems with doing it like he's doing it, which
Yeah.
is frankly.
She described them as buffalo wallows, which I was
Yeah.
like, oh my goodness.
Well,
Ugh.
they're basically looter pits.
Yeah,
Like this is not archaeology,
right.
from what I'm understanding in this.
And I love, if I've chosen well, and I think I have, you'll find what you need right here, and there will be no need for any other excavations.
Right.
I was like, famous last words, dude.
And I guess I don't know what their exact research question is with the garbage dump that he thinks they're digging, but there is no way a garbage dump still covers everything about the community.
Right.
Like, what a preposterous thing to say. And so I liked this last bit because, we need to actually talk about Faye thinks he's an idiot for even choosing this place because he used aerial photography, and the dump is from the 1940s, which is not the early period that they want to be actually investigating.
I know. I love that is added in there. I think that's so clever of the author, because that is something we do, is we look at old historic aerials to see when stuff appeared on the landscape. And that's like basic archaeology.
Yeah. So it isn't a earth-shattering technique, but it's not quite believable, but it's actually closer to believable than normal that making the mistake of that assumption could be a mistake somebody makes, right?
But I feel like he, as the PI, should have looked at the historical aerials
and consulted with his team and his crew chief, basically,
and
who's also doing the research. And
he
should have the experience to know that. Anyway, I liked it. Very end. It ended with he was basically wanting her to say something in response, and so she went with a diplomatic response. I can see this is going to be a challenge. That was not very diplomatic. It very much amused me.
But I can't even imagine what it would be like to come in and then see that and know that he's the PI, and you have to it's just gross.
Yep. I mean, we gotta say that's not that far from reality sometimes, though.
Sometimes that's true, yeah.
I
even wrote a note. It says, who hasn't had that kind of supervisor?
Yeah. And I've been on projects where I fortunately wasn't the one that had to make it work. I was just, digging the holes or whatever. But we were all watching and this person does not know what they're doing.
Right.
And they should not be making these decisions, or they should be consulting with people who know what they're doing. So it is, unfortunately, it can happen.
And I'm sure that's true of any career field out there. There's always that one person who failed up.
Yep. Speaking of failing up, we come to the church meeting. The staff meeting in the church.
Yeah.
We clarify that. She observes walking in that there is a clear hierarchy with PhDs in the front row and all the field techs behind. Again, that's not unbelievable, but it's unfortunate.
Yeah, and
not
I think it's
leadership.
A product of how he runs things more than anything.
Yeah, it says a lot about him, really.
Mm-hmm.
And the culture he's been cultivating, yeah. She also observes that other than herself and Joe, that everyone else there is white.
Yep.
Which is often the case.
Yeah. We're trying to get better about that in archaeology.
Yep. You've heard us talk quite a bit about how things are getting better. There are movements to make things better in certain ways. This is one of those ways where diversifying who is doing the archaeology is actually getting better, but still progress to be made there. So we get updates from various people. Dr. Bingham is doing the genetic makeup research. It doesn't sound like he's making much headway.
No, it doesn't. Some of these updates were interesting. And was it before this that she talked to Magda on the phone and was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And Magda was like, you're going to finish up his field work and then you're going to kind of look around for another site to excavate, and surprise, you found what you wanted to excavate.
Right. Yep. Magda
Very
telling
diplomatic.
her how to navigate that. Yep.
Yeah.
Very well done.
Yeah.
Also, it needs to be pointed out that Magda and the sheriff got married. from the first book.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And they had a kid.
Yes.
Which is why Magda couldn't be here and Faye is working this job instead.
Yeah, which I love.
Yep.
I love that they're together.
Yep. They were a fun couple.
Yeah.
I am very curious how this would have gone with Magda. Because she has she has the authority, she has the clout, and she would not put up with this garbage.
Right.
I think she would have laid this. She's giving Faye good advice on how Faye needs to navigate this.
Right.
But I want to also see how Magda would have done this.
Magda has the experience. She's already established herself. She's in a very different position than Faye is. And I think the advice she gave to Faye is perfect.
Yep. It is the correct advice in this situation for sure. Because one thing you also have to know about archaeology is it's a pretty small field.
Yeah.
And you don't want to burn bridges you don't have to burn.
Right.
So we also got an update from Dr. Brent Harbison, who looks like a frat boy, but apparently is a pretty clever guy. He's trying to do genealogical research, but has hit a problem because records were lost in a fire in 1851. That is not an uncommon issue in research for sure.
Yeah, happens a lot.
Yep. We get an update from the linguist, Dr. Emery,
yeah.
And his big reveal is that he's figured out that the Sujosa name could very well derive from the Portuguese word sujo, which means dirty. So his hypothesis is that it was something that was perhaps applied to them at one point, and they didn't know what it meant, or it just stuck and then it lost meaning and shaped into something else, which is not unheard of, and Faye speaks up about the Creek or the Muskogee, more accurately. But she's spoken up a couple times in this meeting, and each time Raleigh has kind of ignored or put her down.
Yeah, so he is an idiot. I'm just going to say it, because there is one point he says that Dr. Emery was in the grocery store, because everybody kind of comes into the grocery store, and he was just observing. And while at the grocery store, Faye asked him if he took note of anything about their food choices, like what kind of spices were they getting? Was there anything in there that was unusual for the area and, might be traceable to another culture? And the way that Dr. Riley just shuts that down, I'm like, really, guy?
Yeah, food waste is not an important research in a culture.
Right.
He just doesn't want, he just doesn't want to hear from her.
And yes, she's the new person. It could possibly be, she's a woman.
It seems like it's possible, right? With
the
next person
based on the way he also is interacting with other women
Carmen
on the
Martinez
project.
in particular.
Yeah, but he should know better.
Yeah.
But I also wonder too if part of it is he is so focused on, well, no, that can't be it, because he went off script with his excavation.
Magda tells us that he spent a lot of time in a museum basement. And that's where he's good at. He hasn't done field work in a long time. This strikes me as classic insecure boss behavior.
Yeah.
And actually it does fit.
Yeah.
With Carmen too.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, and it doesn't have to be either or, right? It could be a combination of both. It could be.
It's just, I hadn't considered that he might not, well, he's still an asshole, but it might just not be him power hungry or whatever. It could literally just be he knows he's out of his depth.
Yeah. Which, again, failing upward.
Yeah. And then we move on to Carmen Martinez's report, and this is the most detailed one of everybody. She has interviewed most of the town that is willing to be interviewed, and she has found basically a gold mine in one elderly lady, particularly who knows lots of stories and has held on to them. And she wants to stop trying to get people to talk to her who don't want to talk to her, instead talk to this person who has lots of information. And Raleigh gets really up on her grill about this.
Yeah, and it's kind of well, when were you going to come to me to discuss this? And she's like, I'm doing that right now, guy.
Yeah. And then he won't let her change this plan, essentially. So again, that really fits in line with insecurity, doesn't it?
And it's funny because Faye also noted that he never gave a progress report on the archaeological work that he had been doing.
Right.
Which is interesting.
Archaeology work. And you can't see this in the podcast, but I'm doing air quotes. Oh, and the last one, we had one more update from Brent Harbison, who said when he was asked, do you have anything to update? He just said, nope.
Yeah.
And he let it go.
He's just like, okay, cool.
It's weird.
ridiculous.
It's very weird.
After this chapter, I was like, "Oh my god, I really do not like this guy at all. It would be so hard to work under him." Bless Faye.
This is so obviously this is exaggerated, but it's not as exaggerated as you might assume.
Right.
Like, and everyone who's worked in certain environments will have experienced some of these things. It's just, it's a little different in a field setting. Chapter 4. So it's the next day. It's Saturday. Raleigh has said at one point that nobody works on Saturdays, which appalls Faye because she is a workaholic and too into doing archaeology.
Plus, I understand though too, like she just got there. Like she wants to get into she's excited. Everybody else has kind of been there for 2 weeks, so maybe that's part of it too.
Yes, but
Yes, you're right, but
and, I totally get her excitement and everything. That is totally fine, but that is not what they're saying here. This is a standard behavior for her and certain people on this project.
yeah.
And that is kind of toxic.
Yep.
And that is definitely a thing that happens in the field. People will basically put in entire evenings checking paperwork and stuff for free.
Yeah.
And that's not okay.
Right.
And so there's definitely been a pushback on some of that behavior, and there should be.
Yes.
But we're seeing that here for sure, and it's not unrealistic though. That's the important part too. So because of all that, Faye decides she and Joe are going to go out Saturday and try and figure out what's going on with the excavation. Can't get into the tool shed because I assume Raleigh's taken
The keys
the
or whatever.
keys and he's gone for the weekend, so she's stuck.
Yeah.
So she goes to basically set up her office. There's a grocery store locally that has a storage area, and she's sharing office space with Carmen. And she's very proud of her color-coded files and her sturdy metal briefcase, which I have. Nerd.
I know, but I will say I relate. It's like
I relate
like
too.
our boss on the staff meeting today, she noted that she had a new notebook. She was excited about her new notebook. There is something really fun about like a fresh notebook or new pens.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I know. Again, this is pretty authentic stuff here, folks. And while she's setting up, Carmen comes in, and there's some like observations that, Carmen, they just work for a while and they start talking about work. And Faye's like, I'm going to like this person.
Yep.
But Carmen also is working on a Saturday. She says exactly, I work when I have to. And I have there, no, bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, to some degree you have to, but then you need to be taking comp time and getting your...
Yeah. You work for what you get paid for.
Or you get time and a half, depending on the situation, of course.
Right. But don't give your work free time.
No, it's valuable.
Yeah. Plus, then it creates a whole situation where that becomes expected, and that's very toxic and harmful and abusive.
And it pushes your peers into doing the same thing.
Yep.
Anyway, they bash Raleigh a little bit, which is a pretty safe bet, I think, and then talk about the interviewee. And basically, Carmen goes to her for breakfast every day and bribes her with bacon.
I feel like I could be bribed by bacon. Yeah.
I could be bribed with bacon. And this was interesting. Carmen offers the transcripts to Faye to read, and Faye notes this was a sign of trust, and it really is.
Yeah. I mean, that's her
raw data that someone could theoretically take and make their own publications from your data. That's pretty trusting, especially when you don't know the person, right? And so Faye goes on Saturday rounds with Carmen.
And I love the whole interaction where she was kind of surprised that Carmen asked her to go, and she was like, I don't do interviews, I dig in the dirt. It's kind of like I work with the dead, not the living.
I didn't get into archaeology so I could deal with the living, is the phrase we hear sometimes.
But I thought that was interesting too, because archaeologists in today's world, doing field work, I mean, one of the questions on the archaeology forms for the state is, who did you interview? Who was your local informant, they call them. So that is something that archaeologists do. Some archaeologists don't like it. I personally love it. I love talking to the locals, and that's kind of where you get those fun little tidbits, and they'll point you in the direction of, something you have been looking for or didn't know.
Yeah, or some story that's relevant, or
sometimes not relevant. Sometimes it's just a really good lunch spot.
It's true. That's actually true. So they go visit the Smiley home, and Rania Smiley answers the door, and she's not very friendly.
No.
And is not willing to do an interview, she says, this is our family time now, and Carmen is persistent and ultimately gets kind of an agreement to do an interview another day of the week.
And I think, this goes to show how it takes a special kind of person to do these type of oral histories.
Yeah.
And I think the author, Mariana Evans, did a really good job of framing Carmen and creating this very believable character.
Because I would have been like, okay, how about, this date? And when I get told no, then I was like, okay,
You're right.
you know,
Thanks.
okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. We get a little bit of Rania Smiley's thoughts after this, which gives me a lot of hope for this book dealing with some of the ethical issues I thought could be there. Essentially, the community thought when they agreed to this project that they were going to get a lot of things that they need, like a clinic and various things. And she's feeling like they're not getting those things, and it's only basically wealthy people interested in things for themselves.
When I like, he says something to the effect of, why should we be expected to give up our secret? Why should
Yeah.
we be
Or genes.
Yeah. I do like the fact that she respected hard work, but didn't see how spending a day after day just talking to people counted as hard work. So I think I don't think, and it's probably likely that Dr. Riley did not lay really good groundwork as to what the community should expect and the process and, the timeline of things.
This sounds like a really good case for community archaeology.
Right. Yes.
So, folks at home, community archaeology is a thankfully growing trend in situations like this in particular, where in the past, if people talk to the local community, they would say, hey, this is what we're going to do for you.
Mm-hmm.
Community archaeology is more like hey, we want to do archaeology on your past. What do you want to know?
Yes.
And then letting them entirely direct the line of investigation.
Yep.
That way, you're not digging up their secrets. They've decided, I want to know more about how our ancestors did this or how they lived this way. And then you are being directed by what they need rather than what you want.
Yeah, so you're empowering them rather than treating them as just research subjects.
Yeah. So actually, this also reminds me a lot of Saipan in Stealing History.
Mm-hmm.
Saipan was, and that was, again, a very good book, but basically this was a really poor town in Peru that had a really important, significant archaeological site on their back door, and archaeologists and government came in and excavated, and they felt like stuff was being stolen from them, and they wanted to get something out of this, and there was stuff like a bridge was built for them, which collapsed a year later, and so they're very angry about that whole thing, and I can't quite fault them at being angry. So this feels actually kind of similar to that Saipan situation.
But I think this is an important chapter in just kind of establishing how the Sujosa are maybe feeling towards the strangers who have come into their community.
Why we have that initial hostility and stuff in the first chapter. And then this one ends with the Leo Smiley interview that apparently Carmen already had gotten. And there's a lot in this, a lot of little tidbits, a couple little points that stuck out to me. Leo's being interviewed, but he's not exactly friendly as he's being interviewed.
Right.
And I felt like Carmen might have a little disconnect with the reality of the people she's interviewing. She's like saying, well, we could get your wife a grant, or what, a grant?
Yeah, like a scholarship, I think, to an art school because she's a potter.
And he's like, don't talk to me about that stuff.
Yeah.
I tried to do that. All they'll pay for my school, and I'm starving trying to do schoolwork and work, and you want us all to starve, and
Right. But it's, again, Carmen coming in and saying, this is what I can do for you, rather than saying, hey, what do you want me to do for you? Or what can I help you with?
And it feels like she doesn't always fully understand their world situation too.
Right.
That's the phrase I'm looking for, but you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some disconnect because she's clearly had some family wealth at some point, and they are extremely poor.
Yeah.
And that can be, I'm not saying I would navigate that any better, but definitely I can see that disconnect present in this story.
Definitely a good learning opportunity for Carmen.
Yes, exactly. And it ends with a great historical story about Mrs. Smiley's great-great-grandmother, who basically traded the knowledge of a tin mine to the Confederacy in exchange for not conscripting their men.
Yep.
And it's a good story.
Yeah.
And it makes the point that, maybe it extended the war a little bit, but what does she care?
Right. The government's never done anything for her.
Before or since. The Confederacy never did anything for them unless they wanted something from them, right? So she has no loyalty to anyone in those situations. I get it. And then we finally have our final chapter. We start off with another interview in the Montrose family home, which is
just
weird.
Felt super awkward and weird, and I would just be backing out the door if I was Faye.
Yeah. So basically, the wife and mother, Kiki, is gravely ill, and the husband is not responsive. He doesn't seem to care for her discomfort or his situation at all.
Yeah.
There's even a phrase where he says he only cares about now. He's got his health. That's all he needs. And
I
like,
know.
she's
I was
sitting
like,
next to you
wow,
dying.
guy.
Yeah. So that was very strange.
And
He's very dismissive. He's very sexist.
And I guess the daughter, Irene, has pretty much been doing all the caretaking. And I think she was what, 17? Do I have that right? She was,
Sounds right.
yeah, she was
And
like younger.
she had to drop out of school to start to
Mhm.
work and take care of her mom and everything. And it sounds like he's not participating in that.
But it was like Miss Dovey, the older woman who Carmen has been interested in, told Carmen that like the Montrose family comes from one of the oldest Sujosa families in the area, and where I guess a lot of them have outsiders that have kind of come in, and this family doesn't seem to have at least much of that. And he kind of just scoffs at that, and he's like, women's tales don't usually have much to do with the truth. Like he's, you know, so when that was said, I was like, okay, I kind of get this guy's vibe.
Yep, you got him
know?
figured out pretty well. We do get an introduction to one of the defining traits of some Sujosa, which
Mhm.
is a very unusual shade of like turquoise eye
Yeah.
shade, I think.
Yeah.
He has that, and then Faye recalls the person who dropped the paper mache
Jimmy.
person on her also had those eyes, and so she used that to investigate and basically figure out who probably that was.
Mhm.
Carmen knows who he is, of course, because she knows everybody at this point.
But she has a really hard time believing that he would do something
He's
like
such a
that.
good boy,
He's
you know,
such a
and
good
all
little
that. So
boy. Yes.
I could see that being interesting.
I feel like maybe Carmen, and I've seen this before where, you know, an archaeologist maybe just doesn't have a lot of like life experience or hasn't done enough field work that they've seen kind of.
The types.
Yeah, and just like doesn't understand that she's just a little naive, I think, maybe.
Could be. It could be she is swayed by Jimmy's good looks, too.
Possibly, yeah.
And then we end the chapter with both women being treated by 3 really aggressive dogs.
Oh my gosh, that was horrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were walking back after kind of being berated by Mr. Montrose, I don't know, and Faye hears, like, growling in the bushes nearby, and so it's very dramatic. Like, I read this part and I was like, "Oh my gosh, oh my gosh."
Yeah.
Faye and Carmen end up in a tree with 3 very large dogs. I think one was, like, a Rottweiler mix, one was a German Shepherd mix, and one was, like, a Doberman mix.
Right.
Like, jumping up at them, trying to, like, get at them while they're stuck in the tree. They hear someone coming, and Faye's like, "Oh my gosh, stay away, there's really, really dangerous dogs," and it's Irene, the Montrose's daughter. She comes out, and she's like, "Come here, dogs," and they all follow her back to the house.
Yeah, she said, "You can get out of the tree right now." It's like, "Why don't you get him behind the
Yep.
gate first,
Yep,
and
we'll
then
wait a few.
Yeah. No joke. So yeah, that is how our chapter ends.
Very
So,
dramatic.
very dramatic. Lots of groundwork for mysteries.
Yes.
I'm most intrigued. If there was no murder mystery in this book, I'd be fine with that right now.
Honestly, yeah, like, as I was reading it, I was like, "Oh, yeah, this is a murder mystery."
There's going to be a murder at some point, right?
Yeah.
There's enough drama around working with the community and working with different professionals and having a jerk of a boss that I could get behind this as it is, honestly. But I'm looking forward to the mystery now too.
I noted is I feel like this book's gonna have a lot more characters than Artifact did. So Artifacts had quite a few characters, but I think some of the characters here are gonna play possibly larger roles than some did in Artifacts. So I'm looking forward to this lovely developing cast of characters.
Yeah, so here's a question, Barbara. With the rule of murder mysteries, the victim and the culprit are almost certainly someone we've met already.
I know.
Do you have a sense of who at least the victim might be? There's several people I hope it's not.
I know.
Which means it probably will be one of those people.
Irene came to mind. Carmen, but I don't think it's going to be Carmen because I think she's too major of a character.
I think she's got more going on.
Yeah.
Right
But
now.
she came to mind just because, like I said, she seems a little naive.
And she's too likable.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a trope a little bit.
But she's also like going to strangers' houses like consistently. So I felt like that's a possibility. The tutor also came to mind because she was introduced, but we haven't really
We
had a
haven't.
lot of her yet.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, or one of the townspeople. You mentioned Irene. There's a few others that could be. Anyway, we'll have to find out.
Yeah.
But probably next time, I think.
I do kind of wonder if Mr. Montrose is going to be the murderer.
That's too obvious,
because I don't
right?
like him.
I feel like that's too obvious.
It probably is too obvious, yeah.
But next time, we'll hopefully get this murder mystery started. Until then,
Happy reading, everybody!